Hey guys, today I have this 88 944 at the shop, and I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to show you how the wiring and the vacuum lines are routed on the later 944s. Now this is a later car, so it has a different routing and different wires than the earlier cars, but for the most part it's the same. Now this being an 88 model, it doesn't have the Venturi and a few other things are moved around, so I'll try and show you how those are routed, but I will eventually make a video specifically for the 85.5 to 87 models. So alright guys, I'm going to get started here. Now if you own an early 944, that's 85 1 and earlier, then I'll put a link on the screen now because I've already made a video on the wiring and the vacuum line routing for those cars. Now I'm going to start here, and you can see how this 88 here comes across just like the early cars and then goes to your charcoal canister and then comes down, and then from here it's going to run across the firewall like this and down like that. Now so far everything is the same as the early cars, and then here we're going to have this one run down, and then it again tees here and then connects to the second port on the intake, and then comes up, and just like the early cars it tees off. Now remember, if you've seen the other video, that the fuel pressure damper and the regulator were all on the same side on that car, but you can see the later cars have a different fuel rail, so they're now on different ends, and then it just splits apart here. We have our damper here and our fuel pressure regulator over here. Now you can see here on this 88 model that the check valve comes off this T here and then runs to another T, and then there is another line down here, and then that line that goes around towards the battery box goes to your vacuum reservoir. Now if you have an earlier car like pre-87, then this vacuum check valve is actually going to be here. So alright, on the other side of this temperature switch, you're going to have this line here run down and connect to the first port on the intake, and since there's no Venturi, the brake booster hose here comes over and connects to the intake port here. Now I will be putting the intake on and letting you guys see how it all looks once everything is put together, and may look a little more familiar to you. And then this of course connects to the J-boot port right there near the airflow meter, and this hose here goes across to the ISV, and then this hose on the ISV connects to the rear port on the back of the intake. This port here is on the J-boot near the throttle body, and you can see it tees off here and then runs under the brake booster here to connect to this port over here. Following it back across here, this is going to take us to the air oil separator. And again, since this 88 model does not have a Venturi, you have this pipe coming up here to a release valve there, and then there is another valve that's on the rear of the intake that connects to, along with this plug here. So right, the only NA models with the Venturi delete were the 88 and 89 models, so it is rather difficult to find diagrams on these cars, so that's why I wanted to make a specific video on this. All right, if you have an 85.5 to an 87 car, this is the Venturi setup off one of those cars, and I'll go ahead and line it up with this car and then show you how that's routed. So alright, I thought I would start with the brake booster hose, and you can see the earlier models plugs into the Venturi here, and then the Venturi itself plugs into this port, and they just simplified it by removing that Venturi, and the 88 models just plug straight in. There is no Venturi on the 88 models, and you can see that this pipe comes off here, goes around, and then connects to this port near the airflow meter that's on the J-boot, and on the 88 models it's just capped off. And of course, even on the earlier models, this comes across and connects to the ISV, and then this connects to the rear port on the intake. So that didn't change. The only thing they did was get rid of this venturi and this pipe here and capped it off. Now, another thing that they changed when they deleted the venturi was, you can see this pipe on earlier cars just comes over and stops here at the air oil separator. There is no hose here that goes up. Now they added this in 88, and you won't see this on earlier cars. So alright guys, before I put all this back together, I thought I'd show you how the wiring is routed. You can see here this later car has the wiring harness come out of the passenger side firewall, and you got a clamp here that goes on that rear bolt of the intake there. Next you have some grounds that go down and connect to the bell housing, and here are the speed and reference sensor plugs. If you continue this way here, then you'll have the injector harness going back down to this connection here. You can go this direction, and then you'll have the ISV plug, and you'll also have this wire coming up on the 88 models that go to a valve on the back of the intake. And if you keep coming this direction, of course, you're going to have the temp gauge and warning light sensor here, and then the Dme Temp Sensor here. You can also see that it's split up here, and this goes down to the oil pressure sender. Alright, and if you come back up here, you can see that there are two plugs here. This one here is for your throttle position switch, and this one here is for the airflow meter. Now I'm going to start putting everything together so that way you guys can see where it all plugs in. Alright, I now have the intake on, so everything should look more familiar to you guys. And I'll go ahead and show you the vacuum line routing so that way you can get a better understanding of where this goes. See here that this brake booster line runs around and connects to this port on the 88 and 89 models, since they don't have venturi. And then you have this hose here coming from the ISV running to this port on the bottom of the J-boot next to the airflow meter. And then you have this running from the air oil separator to this port on the J-boot that's near the throttle body. And also on 88 models you have this coming up from the air oil separator running to this switch here. Now, this T here comes from the vacuum lines that run to your fuel pressure damper and fuel pressure regulator here. And on the 88 models you can see that it tees off and goes to a check valve that runs around and goes to your vacuum canister. Going back down here from this second port, it runs over to here. And this of course runs to the temp switch below the intake here. And then the other side of that runs to the first port here. So this runs to that temp switch. Now we must not forget that the other side of that ISV connects to a port that is way up underneath the back of the intake here, and that's often the first one that I install since it's so hard to get to. So now that I have the intake on and most of these wires plugged in, I thought we'd have one more look at the wiring harness, and then I'll show you where everything is plugged in at. Now the first thing I want to talk about is this here. You may find this attached to this bracket if you own a late car, and this was for an old diagnostic tool, and it's not plugged into anything, and you can just leave it dangling if you like. But I usually try and attach it to these brackets again, but this one's bent up, and that may be something that I fix later on, but for now I'm going to leave it like that. And then over here you have this clamp, and you can see how this clamp attaches to the intake bolt there. And then of course you have the grounds those two plugs there are for the speed and reference sensors. And then coming down this way, you're going to have the ISV plug down in there, and that should be plugged in before you put the intake on. And on the 88 models, you're going to have this plug come around under the intake to connect to that there. Coming on around, of course, underneath here, you're going to have your two temp sensors, and again, they should be plugged in before you put the intake on. And then there is the Dme Temp Sensor. Coming on around this way, we have the throttle position switch plug there, and then this one is for your airflow meter. And just under the J boot, running this direction here, you can see the wires that run to the oil pressure sender and the oil level sender. So anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this episode. I hope that explained where everything is connected, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.